Well, welcome back. My name is Robert and I am the Recovery Guy. Thank you so much for taking the time to view this video segment. I'm not sure if this is the first opportunity you've had to join us or if you've listened to or viewed any of my other video segments or read any of my blogs, or if you've had an opportunity to listen to any of my podcasts. We're glad you're here. As we look at different topics and suggested video segments that we do, I like to stay as practical as possible with my approach to recovery and the things that I relate to you in the things that I have learned on my journey to recovery. Today what I want to talk to you about is practice, not perfection. It's very important that we understand the distinction between the two, what's requested of us, and what we're even told we shouldn't look for. And it's important to understand the distinction between the two, between practice and perfection. You know, when we were out there ripping and running, as I like to call it, we always thought we had to be a particular way with others and in life circumstances, but we always fell short. And that falling short, for me anyway, caused me great pain, great disappointment, great discouragement. And as a result of the pain, disappointment, and discouragement, I began to drink and I began to use. And in the beginning I found that drinking and using did take me from what I thought was a nothing to what I would call an almost. Unfortunately, that stopped working after a while, and I needed to drink and use more often to begin to achieve that feeling of being an almost. But even that didn't last. By the time I figured out it didn't last, I had become a compulsive alcoholic, meaning I needed to drink any opportunity I could and use the right combination of drugs to try to forget the pain and the disappointment and the despair that I was feeling. So when I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I began to learn some things, but after I had gotten a little physical sobriety, I began to be more concerned with my image of how you saw me than how I was feeling on the inside. And that caused me the same type of pain I had while I was out there before I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as a result of that, I relapsed. And fortunately for me, that relapse was essentially 5 days of trying to recapture that feeling of being an almost. And when I found that couldn't happen, I was fortunate. I was able to come back to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was over 31 years ago. And so as I sit before you today, I'm very grateful that I learned some of the things that I learned to not only not drink and use for the last 31 plus years, but also find a way to have everything I want without having to be perfect. My life is far from perfect, but it's better than it's ever been. And I wouldn't trade this life for any other life that I could have or that I see any other person living. But it's so important to understand that I practice the principles in all my affairs. I don't claim perfection. Matter of fact, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 60, after it gets done with in the chapter of how it works, and it talks about the 12 steps, and many of us exclaimed, what an order, I can't go through with it. And many of you are familiar with what it says. In the final sentence it says, we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own life. B, that probably no human power could have relieved us our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if he were sought. And that's the wonderful thing. See, my higher power God, my Creator, He alone is perfect. And what I do today, based on what I just read and the other things that are in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, certainly the first 164 pages, is to learn principles that I can practice day in and day out to move towards a better life that I want to live for myself, for my wife, for my children, and for everyone around me. So I want you to understand, though, there is one thing we have to do to perfection. And that one thing that I must do to perfection is the first step. Step one, where I come in and I admit that I am powerless over alcohol, that my life has become unmanageable. That is the one step that I need to do to perfection. The reason that is necessary to do to perfection is the minute I think that maybe I'm not that powerless over alcohol, maybe I can just have one, maybe I can manage my own life, maybe it's not out of control like I thought it was, or maybe because I've been sober as long as I've been sober, I can take those things back. That is a myth. That type of thinking has gotten more people drunk and high than any lie they could have ever believed. So when I say practice not perfection, there is, with one exclusion, we must do step one to perfection. Everything else is just practice. And practice, as it's defined, as I've written down here, is a habitual or customary performance. Habitual or customary performance. Something that I do that's habitual on a daily basis, on a regular basis. It's also defined as repeated performance or systematic exercise for the purpose of acquiring skill or proficiency. So as we go through the steps and we do things like came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, we're doing that to practice, because that is something that we grow in over time, but we continue to practice it, to try to just get better at it, so our life will continue to improve over time as we travel through various stages of sobriety, and hopefully to the point where we can say that we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And I love that word seemingly, because the more I practice the principles of recovery that's found in the first 164 pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the more I practice that, the more my hopeless state of mind and body fades away. The less it seems to be real. The more I practice, the less it seems to be real. And there's a great correlation between the two. So I continue to practice. I practice day in, day out. And as the definition says, a habitual or customary performance. So as I continue to move through the step 3 of turning my will and my life under the care of God, as we understood God, I practice that on a regular basis. To this day, as I work on step 11, where I sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. I do that every day as one of my 3 maintenance steps, but I continue to practice it. I certainly haven't perfected my degree of prayer. I certainly haven't perfected turning my will and my life over to His care. I certainly haven't perfected seeking His power. But you know what? Day in and day out, I practice that, because I know as I continue to practice, I continue to learn more. And the more I learn, the better I feel. The better I feel, the greater message I have to carry that comes in step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening, which I continue to practice. I continue to practice these things so that spiritual awakening continues to improve. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. I practice day in and day out. And even in step 10, steps 10, 11, and 12, after we have recovered are the 3 maintenance steps that we perform day in and day out. Steps 1 through 9 get me to the point of recovery. Because it says in the big book that for by this time I have recovered. Again, what do I recover from? Certainly I haven't entered into perfection. I recover from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. That condition that tells me nothing's ever going to get better here and certainly out there. But I have recovered from that. And I stay recovered from that by practicing the principles in all my affairs. The principle of cleaning house. The principle of trusting God. The principle of working with others. So day in and day out, I know I have to continue to practice because I have to continue to take my personal inventory. And when I'm wrong, the assumption is I'm going to make mistakes. And guess what? I do. And guess what? So do you. But there's nothing wrong with that because we're practicing. And when you're practicing, you're bound to make a mistake. I know I do, but I continue to take that personal inventory. And when I'm wrong, I promptly admit it and I move on. And I hope I don't make that mistake again. I hope my continual practice causes me to improve in the areas of life that I desire to improve. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better father. I want to be a better grandfather. I want to be a better friend. I want to be a better son. I want to be a better helper to those that I am now mandated to serve as a person of recovery. So, do we ever gain perfection? No. Do we ever stop practicing? No. Practice, not perfection, but I continue to practice in a way that would please God, that would culminate into making a difference into your life. My name is Robert. I'm a happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic, and I'm so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you again, and God bless you.